The wanderer turned to face the man. It was a guy wearing a simple white shirt that hung loosely on his torso. He also wore brown trousers, the ends of which were stuffed into his boots and tied with strings. He gave the impression of a young man who had just decided to start out as an adventurer, but he looked far too clean to have any real experience. He couldn't have come from far away, probably even lived here. "I said I was sorry. What more do you want from me?" "You have insulted my honor!" The man reproached him, now putting his hand on a long sword by his hip. The wanderer sighed. "Always this shit. That was not my intention," he finally replied, trying a calming gesture with his hands. Surely the guy had to see that he wasn't from around here and that he carried more equipment than he did. "It's not done with that." The man's grip tightened around his sword. "You owe me a duel or a sum of gold to make up for the damage." "Ah, so that's what this is all about. We're trying to draw the attention of the bystanders on us and make yourself out to be the good guy. You're putting pressure on me that I'll pay my way out of this trouble quickly. You probably even donate some of your spoils to the church, don't you? Well, I don't have any gold on me," he finally replied dryly. The man's sure gaze twitched briefly. "What do you mean?" It was not difficult for him to pick out the insecurity from the tone of the voice, even if it was still distant and certainly not noticeable to the untrained ear. The man cleared his throat and held his left hand to his chest. "I would also settle for a lower sum, out of generosity, of course." Now he recoiled a step as the wanderer drew his short sword. "I'm afraid I'll have to fight. To the death, right?" The man's pupils dilated. "Yes, that would be correct, actually. However..." The man ran his index finger down his collar and moved it around. "I'm just thinking about leaving it at that. You don't look like someone who wants to die to me." The matter could have ended here and now. Something in him reminded him that he didn't need the intention, and that there was something else whose voice was louder right now. He took a step forward and raised his short sword, so that the tip of it pointed at the man's chest. "You're wrong. Come to think of it, I'm a little tired of living." I choose to let you live." "No," the wanderer replied ironily. People began to pause and turn around to them. "I cannot allow that. There's honor at stake." He weighed the blade in his hand and told the fib. "And once the sword is drawn, it must also draw blood. So it is written." Where's that written?" "Don't you know?" The wanderer tilted his head and looked at him in a faint, sullen way. "It's about the honor, after all." The honor." "Attack me!" It looked strange to see a person trying to withdraw the head between their shoulders out of shame, like a turtle in its shell. "What are you waiting for?" The wanderer now demanded louder. "Are you not a man?" His opponent looked around and noticed that the people were beginning to whisper among themselves, their eyes fixed on him. He gritted his teeth, and in one stroke his long sword was drawn. The wanderer began to draw a circle with small steps, and since the man wished to keep his distance as much as possible, he followed suit. But his opponent came closer and closer towards him, provoking him with beckoning movements and shouts like, "Well," or "Come on." Finally, his patience was wearing thin, and with a yell he charged at the black-armored stranger. The latter dodged the attack with a simple step to the side. The man had weighed so heavily with the blade that his body now fell behind it and he began to stagger. Before he could regain his footing, the wanderer kicked him in the bottom, causing the man to fall to his knees. Before he understood what happened, the wanderer grabbed him by the chin with his free hand and threw him backwards to the ground. Groaning, he lay there, and after only a painful blink he suddenly noticed the point of the blade at his throat. Who are you?" he wanted to know from the stranger, and he replied, "Is that really what matters most to you right now? I can tell you. After that I will kill you." No, wait!" "What for?" I was just kidding. I didn't really mean to." "Does this look like fun to you?" No, my fault. I already forgotten what is written." The man had to swallow. There was such a thick lump in his throat that he actually had to retch, but he dared not stir his throat even a little with the cold, tickling steel tip of the sword against it. Suddenly the savage raised his blade, and the man squeezed his eyes tightly shut. The last thing he felt was a burning pain along his throat and something warm emerging from it. His breath caught and his fingers stuck into the dirt of the path. Until he realized he was still breathing, and quite well at that. Very fast but darn good for someone who'd had his throat slit. He opened his eyes again and saw the man standing a few steps away. Blood was on the tip of his blade. but so little. Only now did the man realize that this was not at all the last thing he experienced. Quickly he straightened up with one arm and grabbed his neck with the other hand. He was bleeding, yes, but only from a scratch. After cleaning it on his cloak, the wanderer put the sword back into its scabbard. "It has drawn blood. That's enough," he spoke and took Assar's reins again. The man did nothing but stare after the stranger, flabbergasted. He could not move from the spot. It became clear to him that the guy had just either been damn lucky in what he pulled off with his neck, or he had done it often enough to know exactly how to strike so as not to go too far. Suddenly he became aware of people laughing. Some were pointing at him, more likely at his lab. He hadn't even noticed that he had wet his pants in panic. Assar snorted, and somehow the wanderer had the feeling that the animal was amused by the situation. He himself, however, was not so sure whether snubbing this man in such a way had been a smart idea. He was lucky that not so many wanted posters had reached him here in the north, but it was only a question of time. He had the feeling that he had to teach this guy a lesson so that he would no longer be so quick to prey on the gullible. Good for the gullible, but bad for himself. He paused for a moment and put his hand on his chest as if to feel his own heartbeat. Was that really the only reason? One thing was certain: if he continued to draw attention to himself like this, the consecrated blade would surely catch him soon. Somehow, and that he knew. Somehow he had to escape from Sanctor. Completely. He has now spent an hour walking. Mostly conifers grew in these parts, and the air here in the woods, which local people called Blanegar's undergrowth, was fragrant. Many of the birds had long since flown to the warmer south, and now only ravens, crows, or owls could be heard calling, and then only occasionally. To his regret, the deer knew how to hide well. It happened much more often that he came across a hunting animal. Most of the wolves, however, did not really want to engage with him. He was sure that they would generally not like to engage with a human. After all, the latter hunted them mercilessly. Some might have said animals aren't smart, but he believed they could remember such things and passed them on from generation to generation. He could understand them well anyway. After all, men wanted him dead too. He took a deep breath and sighed. It would probably be a while before he reached the next village. Blacknot was its name, if he was not mistaken. The bread was a start, but simply not enough. Until then, he had to find something to eat, but he was reluctant to go back the way he had come. Maybe, it occurred to him, it wouldn't be a bad idea to stop by the Shadow Dagger mercenaries' camp, even if he was sure to get the telling off from Akira, not to mention Amaron. That faithful dog. However, he felt an icy lump made itself known when he thought about turning back now. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was running right into the clutches of the consecrated blade if he were to do that. But then he noticed. There it was again, he whispered to the Frisian, who had also raised his ears and had them turned to the left behind him. In a slow and steady movement, the wanderer placed his left hand on the scabbard of the longsword. He held his right near the hilt. He was by now quite certain that he was not mistaken. Apparently he had other pursuers, but he had to find out which ones. If we keep running like this, Assar, he spoke a little louder, we'll never make it to the meet-up by sunset. There was a rustling behind them. He increased his walking pace and ran with the horse into the forest to the right. He would try to loose them between the trees and set a trap for them, or bypass them altogether, should they prove to be superior. It was not hard to notice that his pursuers were also picking up the fast pace. They were not particularly adept at it. This could not be the consecrated blade. He would have liked to just look behind him, but he didn't want to look insecure, and they shouldn't feel that way. Let them think that they were about to catch him full on. The horse grumbled, almost whinnying. A little further ahead was a dense group of trees with bushes and a rock. The wanderer walked briskly past it and turned the corner. A little further ahead was another group of rocks. Now he ran towards it. Assar tried to trot after him, but he did not make it in time before the figures had turned the first corner. Where did he go? One of them asked, looking around. Did he leave his horse behind? I saw it walking so crippled in the village. Maybe it wasn't worth the trouble for him anymore. I wouldn't say so. At these words they all jumped around. That was clearly a voice that did not belong to them. And there he stood. Behind them stood the man they were chasing, all dressed in black. How had he gotten behind them? Now he drew the longsword. Why are you following me? There were 3 men, and he actually could have saved himself the question, for now he realized that one of them was the man he had exposed in the village. Oh no, he sighed. Please don't. You think I'm just going to let that slide? I honestly hoped you would. But if it's any consolation, I feel stupid myself. That's because you are. Nobody fucks with me, and certainly not in front of the people. They saw the man grip his sword tighter. Should he do that all he wanted? After all, they had their weapons too. But one of them took a step back. Something had changed in the man's eyes. They saw him take a deep breath and grind his teeth. Every time. Now the man reached for his head with his free hand and laughed. I really feel totally stupid, you know that? He asked them with a cheerful smile. It was a laugh that almost invited them to join in. Maybe it was all just a stupid misunderstanding, one that could be drowned over a glass in the tavern. Both companions lost their breath when the guy suddenly sprang up and plunged his blade into the belly of their friend, who had earlier asked them for help. With his free hand, the wanderer grabbed him by the throat, so that he had to look him in the eye. Every time I show mercy, every time, you trample on me. Me showing mercy despite the abuse. He drove the sword in deeper, enunciating each word one by one in a voice trembling with anger. And you just keep going. With a jerk, he drove the sword up a little further. Blood now shot from the wound, and the man would have sunk to his knees if the wanderer had not held him. But then he tore the sword from his victim's body and with one kick knocked him backwards to the ground. He had not turned to face the other two. However, he could sense that they were standing there rigidly. Piss off, he growled. You killed him. I'll soon kill you too if you don't piss off. Now he had jerked around and raised his sword. True, he had only faked his rush, but it was enough to chase them away. For a while longer you could hear their footsteps stumbling through the leaves and branches lying around. For even longer, however, he just stood there with his sword clutched tightly. His gaze was fixed on the dead man, who had been fidgeting and making faint sounds for a few seconds before. Massar pushed his muzzle under the wanderer's left. Only this released him from his rigidity with a twitch. The touch briefly made his breathing much louder and his chest quivered, but he quickly calmed down again. He then cleaned the blade on the dead man's clothes and put it back in its sheath. He stared at his left hand. A moment later he clenched it into a trembling fist. When he opened it again and looked at it, he muttered, I'm sorry. I'm nothing but a monster.